The rain had been falling since dawn, steady and unrelenting, drumming against the tall glass windows of the Meridian Hotel's private lounge. Inside, the air was warm but tense, heavy with the scent of polished mahogany, leather, and freshly ground coffee. A half-circle of men in tailored suits sat around the table, their eyes fixed on the man at its head, Donovan Hale, the kind of millionaire whose name never appeared in tabloid gossip, yet whose influence seemed to ripple through every market in the city. At his right stood the hotel's general manager, Arthur Bellamy, a man whose silver hair and rigid posture gave him the air of an old-world butler who had somehow slipped into the modern corporate age. Arthur prided himself on control. His voice never cracked, his hands never shook, and in all his years at the Meridian, no guest had ever caught him unprepared. Until now. It happened in an instant, so fast Arthur could barely process it. One of the Chinese investors, a sharp-eyed man named Zhang Wei, had made a casual remark under his breath, something in Mandarin that Arthur didn't understand but that drew the faintest smile from the other investors. Donovan Hale didn't miss a beat. He leaned forward slightly, his deep voice shifting effortlessly into Mandarin. Precise tones, fluid cadence, the kind of mastery that could only come from years of study or immersion. The words rolled off his tongue like a river over smooth stones, and for a fraction of a second, silence bloomed around the table. Arthur froze. It wasn't just that he didn't understand what was being said. It was the realization that his role in this meeting had just shifted. The script he had prepared, the polite interruptions, the guided conversation, all of it had become irrelevant. Donovan and Zhang were now speaking in a language he couldn't follow. Locked in a current he had no way of steering. The other investors leaned in, their expressions sharpening with curiosity. Arthur's palms began to sweat beneath the crisp cuffs of his shirt. His training told him to remain calm, to mask any hint of discomfort, but the weight in his chest grew heavier with each syllable that passed between them. Then, just as Arthur considered excusing himself to fetch an interpreter, the conversation turned. Zhang's expression shifted, the smile vanished, replaced by a slight furrow of the brow. Donovan's voice dipped lower, his Mandarin taking on a precision so deliberate it was almost a warning. And that's when it happened. A voice, soft but clear, carrying across the polished room like the first note of a song, cut through the air. The words were Mandarin, flawless and elegant. Arthur turned sharply toward the source. Standing at the edge of the room, holding a silver tray with untouched glasses of mineral water, was her Elise. She had been in the Hale household for barely 3 months, working quietly in the background, the kind of employee who seemed to know how to become invisible when the powerful were speaking. A young black woman with steady eyes and an unshakable calm, Elise had never drawn attention to herself until now. Donovan's gaze snapped to her, his expression unreadable. Zhang blinked, as if unsure whether he had heard her correctly. She stepped forward with measured grace, setting the tray down without a clink of glass. And then she spoke again, her Mandarin warm and melodic, translating Donovan's last statement into perfect, nuanced Chinese that carried the exact shade of meaning. Not just the words, but the intent. Arthur could feel every pair of eyes in the room flicker between Donovan and Elise, as if some hidden door had just opened in the walls of the Meridian. When she finished, silence returned. Zhang's expression softened, not into a smile, but into something heavier, more respectful. Donovan leaned back slowly in his chair, his fingertips pressed together beneath his chin, studying her as if she were an unsolved puzzle. Arthur's heart was still pounding. In all his years managing the most exclusive clients in the city, he had never been blindsided like this, by someone he thought he knew in a language he didn't understand, in a moment he could not control. And though no one said it out loud, everyone in that room understood one thing. The balance of power had just shifted. The meeting adjourned without the crisp efficiency Arthur preferred. Conversations lingered in low murmurs, chairs scraping softly against the floor. The investors filed out with handshakes and polite nods, but their glances, the ones they threw toward Elise, were different now. It wasn't curiosity alone. It was the kind of watchfulness reserved for someone who had just revealed a card no one expected her to hold. Arthur busied himself gathering the folders, pretending not to notice Donovan's eyes tracking Elise as she slipped quietly toward the service door. She didn't rush, but she also didn't linger. It was as though she knew that the longer she remained in that room, the more questions would follow. Donovan rose, buttoning his charcoal suit jacket with unhurried precision. "Arthur," he said, his voice low enough to sound casual. "Have Elise bring me a coffee in the study." Arthur's fingers tightened on the folder in his hand. He opened his mouth to suggest that one of the regular servers could do it, but Donovan had already stepped away, his stride smooth and unhurried. The study was 2 floors above the private lounge, a quieter space where the storm outside pressed faint shadows across the bookshelves. Donovan sat near the window, one leg crossed over the other, the sleeve of his shirt pulled just enough to reveal the edge of a gold watch. He didn't look up when Elise entered, a porcelain cup and saucer balanced in her hands. She set it on the small table beside him. "Your coffee, sir," she said in English this time, her voice steady. He didn't reach for the cup. Instead, his gaze lifted to hers, sharp and probing. "How long have you been fluent in Mandarin?" Her posture didn't change, but her fingers curled slightly against the hem of her apron. "A while." "That wasn't just fluency," he said, leaning back in his chair. "That was precision, intonation, cultural shading. You didn't learn that from a textbook." She hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. "I've lived abroad. In China." Her eyes met his, a flicker quick and controlled. "Yes." Arthur, standing discreetly by the doorway, felt the air in the room shift. Donovan rarely pursued personal questions with his staff. He valued efficiency, discretion, loyalty, but curiosity, that was rare. "And yet," Donovan continued, "you never mentioned it. Not once in 3 months." "It never seemed relevant," Elise said quietly. Donovan's lips curved, not in amusement but in something more unreadable. A mixture of intrigue and calculation. "It's relevant now." The silence between them stretched, long enough for the patter of rain to become the loudest sound in the room. Then Donovan reached for the coffee, took a slow sip and said, "You'll join us for the investor dinner tonight. 8 o'clock. Wear something appropriate." Arthur almost stepped forward to object. Staff didn't attend investor dinners. It was an unspoken rule, one of the many that kept the gears of Donovan Hale's world running smoothly. But Donovan's tone left no room for negotiation. Elise inclined her head. "Yes, sir." When she left the study, Arthur followed her down the hall. "You should be careful," he said once they were out of earshot. "Mr. Hale doesn't like surprises." She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "Neither do I." Arthur didn't know what to make of that. By the time evening arrived, the rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean and glistening under the streetlights. The dining hall in the Meridian's top floor was set with crystal glasses and silver flatware, the air rich with the scent of seared duck and truffle. Donovan stood at the head of the long table, greeting each guest in turn. When Elise entered, wearing a simple black dress that fell just above her knees, the conversations dimmed by a fraction. Subtle, but enough to notice. She didn't sit at the far end, as Arthur had expected. Donovan gestured to a seat 2 places from his own, directly across from Zhang Wei. Dinner began with small talk, the kind that circled around business but never landed. Elise remained quiet, her eyes attentive, her posture straight. But when Zhang made a comment in Mandarin, a casual remark about the wine, she replied without hesitation, her voice carrying that same warmth and fluency as before. The conversation deepened. They moved from wine to art, from art to politics, from politics to the subtle nuances of Chinese proverbs. Donovan listened more than he spoke, his gaze flicking between Zhang and Elise, measuring every exchange. Arthur, watching from the side of the room, felt the knot in his stomach tighten. This wasn't just about language anymore. Something was passing between them, an undercurrent he couldn't translate, but could feel all the same. By the time dessert arrived, Zhang was leaning forward, his voice lower, his eyes fixed on Elise as if she had just spoken a truth no one else in the room could see. And Donovan was smiling, But it wasn't the smile of a host pleased with his dinner. It was the smile of a man who had just realized the game he was playing had more players than he thought. The dinner ended later than usual. The investors drifted out in twos and threes, some still speaking in Mandarin, others silent as if deep in private calculations. Donovan walked Zhang Wei to the elevator himself, their conversation too low for even Arthur to catch. Elise didn't leave with the guests. Instead, she lingered at the far end of the hall, speaking quietly with the sommelier about a bottle of 1998 Chateau Lafite Rothschild that had been opened but left unfinished. Arthur noticed the way the kitchen staff eyed her as they passed. Normally, a maid would have been invisible in a gathering like this, refilling glasses, clearing plates, and then disappearing to the service corridors. But tonight, Elise had been seen. Not just noticed, but marked. By the time Arthur made it back to the staff quarters, the whispers had already begun. "She was sitting at the table," murmured one of the younger servers. "And talking like she belonged there," added another. "In Mandarin, no less," said a third, lowering her voice. "Perfect. Like a native." Someone else chuckled, though it carried a nervous edge. "Maybe she's one of those undercover types. You know, like in those dramas where the maid is actually rich or—" "Enough," Arthur said sharply from the doorway. The room fell quiet, the air thick with the embarrassment of being caught. But as he walked away, he knew the chatter would start again as soon as he was gone. The Meridian staff knew the unspoken rules as well as he did. The higher you rose in Donovan Hale's orbit, the closer you came to heat you might not survive. Later that night, Arthur found himself in the service corridor outside Donovan's private office. The door was closed, but the faintest murmur of voices seeped through the gap beneath it. Donovan's was low and measured, but the other voice, Elise's, was softer still, almost reluctant. "I told you it was years ago," she was saying. "I didn't think it mattered anymore." "It matters," Donovan replied. "If Zhang recognizes you, he'll tell the others. I need to know if there's anything they could use against you or against me." Silence followed. Arthur didn't linger. He knew better than to eavesdrop on conversations that had weight in them. But the fact that Donovan was already thinking in terms of leverage told him this situation was moving into dangerous territory. The next morning, the rain returned, sweeping in from the harbor in silver sheets. Elise was in the main hall, polishing the brass railing when Arthur approached. "People are talking," he said without preamble. Her rag slowed against the railing. "About me?" He nodded. "You should keep your head down for a while. Let things settle." She gave a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I've been keeping my head down my whole life, Mr. Bellamy. It doesn't always help." Arthur wanted to press, to ask where she had learned Mandarin so perfectly, why Zhang had looked at her the way he did, and why Donovan seemed so intent on keeping her close. But he stopped himself. Curiosity, he knew, could be fatal in this line of work. That afternoon, a delivery arrived at the Meridian. It came not through the usual service entrance but through the front lobby, a polished wooden box carried by a courier in a black suit. Inside, nestled in silk, was a porcelain tea set painted with intricate blue dragons. The note tucked inside was written in Mandarin, the brushstrokes elegant and deliberate. Arthur couldn't read it, but Elise could. She stood at the service counter, eyes fixed on the note for a long time before folding it neatly and slipping it into her apron pocket. "Who's it from?" Arthur asked. Her gaze lifted to his, calm but unreadable. "An old acquaintance." That night, she didn't return to the staff quarters. No one saw her leave, and no one saw her return. But by dawn, she was back in her uniform, her hair tied neatly, as if nothing had happened. Arthur had been in this business long enough to recognize the signs. Someone had found her. Someone from her past. And if they had gone through the trouble of sending a message in Mandarin, not to Donovan, but to her directly, it meant only one thing. Whatever Elise was running from, it was catching up. The note burned in her apron pocket all morning, its presence a constant pressure against Elise's ribs. She went about her duties with the same quiet precision as always, dusting the high shelves in the library, polishing the silver frames in the corridor, refilling the crystal decanters in Donovan's study. But her mind kept returning to the brushstrokes. She had recognized the handwriting immediately. It was the kind of calligraphy no school could teach anymore, the kind reserved for those born into circles where ink and paper were not simply tools, but symbols of legacy. The strokes were balanced, unhurried, full of the confidence of someone who had never needed to sign their name for the sake of being recognized, because their family name already carried weight enough to open any door. And there had been no name on the note, just a single sentence. "You still owe an answer." She kept her face blank as she worked, even when Donovan passed her in the main hall. He slowed as if to speak to her, but Arthur appeared with a sheaf of papers that required his signature, and the moment passed. By early afternoon, Elise had retreated to the far end of the service wing, a place where few people lingered. The linen storage room, narrow and lined with shelves stacked high with folded sheets and towels. There, she pulled the note from her pocket and stared at it again, tracing the characters with her eyes until they seemed to shift on the page. It had been years since she'd seen that handwriting. Years since the last time she'd stood in the same room as the man who wrote it, the youngest son of the Liang family. The Liangs weren't simply wealthy. They were entrenched. Old money, old influence, the kind that survived revolutions and market crashes by never betting on the wrong side. And she had once been in their world, not as an equal, but as someone close enough to glimpse the machinery behind their walls. That was why she had left. That was why she had buried every trace of her past when she came back across the ocean. The tea set was a warning. Late that evening, Donovan summoned her to his study. The rain had paused, leaving the city in a haze of mist that pressed against the tall windows. He sat at his desk, a single lamp casting gold light over the papers spread before him. "Tell me about the note," he said without preamble. She kept her hands clasped in front of her. "It was from someone I used to know." "Used to know?" he repeated, leaning back. "And they send you a gift like that? With a message?" "It's not a gift," she said quietly. "It's a reminder." His eyes narrowed. "Of what?" She met his gaze. "That they haven't forgotten me." For a long moment, neither spoke. Donovan's fingers tapped against the arm of his chair, his mind clearly turning over possibilities. Why would a man like Zhang Wei react the way he did when you spoke Mandarin at dinner? And why would someone from your past send you this now? She hesitated. Because the Liangs don't like loose ends. It was the first time she had spoken the name aloud in years, and the air seemed to grow heavier for it. Donovan's expression didn't change, but his stillness was telling. "I know the Liangs," he said finally. "Not personally, but I've dealt with people who work for them. And I've heard enough to know they play for keeps. They don't send messages unless they expect an answer," she said. He studied her for a long while. "Then you'll give them one." She shook her head. "If I do, I'm back in their orbit. And once you're in, there's no leaving on your own terms." Donovan's jaw tightened. "You think ignoring them will work?" "I think," she said, her voice steady, "that it's the only way to survive." But as she left the study that night, she knew survival was no longer a simple matter of silence. The note had found her. The Liangs had found her. And soon, Donovan would have to decide whether protecting her was worth the risk of drawing their attention to himself. The question now wasn't if her past would catch up. It was how much collateral damage it would leave when it did. By the following morning, Donovan had already begun pulling at threads he had hoped would remain hidden. Elise moved through her tasks with quiet efficiency, but beneath her calm exterior, she felt the weight of his attention. He had not approached her directly again, yet every interaction, a glance, a gesture, a question left unasked, carried the unspoken calculation of a man who never wasted effort and never underestimated threats. Donovan had made one call before breakfast, speaking in a tone that blended casual charm with underlying authority. Within hours, a network of contacts, lawyers, private investigators, and former business partners in Asia began sending back information. He read through reports and dossiers while Elise worked silently nearby, her presence a reminder that no matter how carefully he controlled his empire, some things in life refused to remain simple. The dossier was meticulous. It traced Elise's movements back nearly a decade, documenting her sudden disappearance from Beijing's elite circles. She had been the daughter of a close Liang family associate, not directly blood-related, but trusted enough to navigate the family's most delicate affairs. She had excelled in language, diplomacy, and cultural nuance, skills that had allowed her to operate in rooms where decisions were made in whispers, not announcements. The private investigators noted the same thing Donovan already suspected. She had vanished suddenly, leaving no trace, no forwarding address, no explanation. In the world of high-stakes Chinese elites, sudden disappearances were almost always interpreted as either betrayal or threat mitigation. Donovan leaned back in his chair, considering this carefully. His interest in Elise had always been more than mere curiosity. She was skilled, observant, and capable, qualities he respected deeply. But now, knowledge of her past transformed her from a talented employee to a potential liability. He had to know, had the Liangs sent the note themselves or a proxy? And if they were coming for her, what was their goal, leverage, revenge, or something far more personal? Elise appeared at the study door, holding a tray of freshly brewed tea. "You called for me, sir?" Donovan gestured for her to sit, placing the dossier on the desk between them. Elise's fingers hovered over the thick stack of papers, the edges of the pages soft from handling. Her eyes scanned the top of the first report, and she stiffened imperceptibly. "You've done your homework," she said quietly. "I've done what I always do," Donovan replied. "I prepare for every possibility." Her gaze flicked up to his, a mixture of respect and wariness. "Some possibilities you might not understand. Try me," he said. She leaned back slightly, considering how much to reveal. The Liangs were dangerous, not just for their wealth, but for their reach and their memory. They didn't forgive slights. They didn't forget mistakes. She had witnessed it firsthand. "I worked for them in a capacity few people would imagine," she began. "I was entrusted with matters that required discretion, diplomacy, and knowledge of languages. Not just Chinese, but the unspoken nuances that let one navigate the corridors of power without anyone outside noticing." Donovan listened, absorbing every word. The edge in her voice told him she had learned those lessons the hard way, perhaps even with danger at her back. "They trusted me because they thought I was expendable," she continued. "But expendable doesn't mean invisible. I saw things that, if I had spoken, could have ruined families, businesses, even governments. I left because I couldn't be used as a pawn anymore. And yet," Donovan said carefully, "they've found you." "Yes," she admitted. "And that note, it's only the beginning. Whoever sent it is testing me, seeing if I'll respond. But responding would be walking straight back into a web I barely escaped." Donovan folded his fingers together, leaning forward. "You won't be alone if they come. But I need to know the truth, Elise. Not just what you did, but who you are now. Because if the Liangs intend to reach you here, I need to anticipate every move they might make." Elise's eyes softened, just for a fraction of a second. "I've survived this long by staying invisible, Donovan. You have no idea how much courage it takes just to keep living in the open now." He leaned back, considering her words. He had dealt with danger in business before, financial collapses, corporate espionage, even blackmail, but Elise's story wasn't about money. It was about power rooted in legacy, influence, and secrets that could shatter lives. Outside, the rain had returned, a slow drizzle that painted the city in silvery gray. The streets below the Meridian shimmered, but inside Donovan's study, a different kind of storm was brewing. The first real threat had already moved in the shadows, and Donovan felt a tightening in his chest. The certainty that nothing in Elise's past had truly ended pressed on him. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, leaving slick streets reflective, neon glinting like shards of glass. Inside the Meridian, Elise moved with her usual grace, polishing silverware in the grand hall, but every nerve in her body was alert. The dossier Donovan had seen was only the beginning. An unseen weight pressed upon her as if the Liang's influence had silently crossed oceans. Arthur appeared, his face unusually tense. "Sir Donovan wants to see you in the study. Now." Elise nodded and left the hall. Marble floors echoed beneath her steps, shadows stretching along the corridors like silent witnesses. In the private study, Donovan sat behind his desk, the faint light casting the city skyline through rain-soaked glass. Papers and folders were neatly stacked but untouched. His gaze was fixed on her. "There's been a development," he said quietly, motioning toward the windows. "Someone's asking questions about you." Elisa's stomach tightened. "Questions?" "Yes, about your past, where you've been, who you know." Her hands clasped instinctively. "Then they're closer than I thought." Donovan nodded. "Closer and moving fast. Contacts in Hong Kong confirm the note sender isn't alone. People are watching the Meridian, waiting for a mistake." A cold realization settled into her chest. For years, anonymity and distance had been her shield. Now that wall was being tested brick by brick. "They're skilled," Donovan continued. "Not amateurs. They move quietly but efficiently. One misstep, and this becomes more than a warning. It's a trap." Elisa's jaw tightened. She had faced danger under the Liang's watchful eye, navigating situations where a wrong word could bring ruin or worse. Here, in a sanctuary of her own choosing, the rules had changed. "I know," she said steadily. "I've prepared for scenarios like this. But here, we don't know who to trust." Donovan rose, walking toward the window. Silver trails of rain traced the glass. "We'll find out. Security will tighten, every exit monitored. But you must be careful. One glance, one misstep, and they learn more than they should." Elise met his eyes. "I understand." Later that night, Elise returned to staff quarters. Corridors seemed longer, shadows deeper. Near the linen storage, a figure emerged from behind boxes. A young man in black, masked, confident, trained. "Who's there?" Elise demanded in Mandarin, sharp and commanding. The figure hesitated, then vanished silently, leaving a single envelope. Thick, heavy, and marked with a line in Mandarin identical to the previous note. "You cannot escape." A chill ran down her spine. Reporting to Donovan, he ordered increased surveillance throughout the Meridian, observing every corridor, entrance, and staff member. "They've begun to play," he said quietly. "We've just entered the first move of their game." The following morning, the Meridian felt heavier. Elisa's calm demeanor masked measured steps, calculated glances. She had navigated danger before, but here, in her supposed sanctuary, the threat was close, unpredictable, and persistent. Donovan waited in the study, leaning against his mahogany desk. "We can't just wait," he said sharply. "We need a plan." Elise nodded. "First, tighten the perimeter. Cameras, sensors, rotations, every exit, every corridor." They reinforced security using former operatives, tech specialists, and analysts familiar with the Liang's methods. Elise provided insights into subtle cues. Silent observers, probing questions, minor disturbances. Donovan coordinated personnel schedules, camera angles, and electronic monitoring. Every corridor, stairwell, and entrance became a calculated observation point. By late afternoon, temporary calm settled. Elise leaned against a polished column. "You make it sound easier than it is," she said wryly. Donovan's acknowledgement was subtle, "because I've never faced anyone quite like them or you." Suddenly, an alert. A figure lingered near the service entrance, hidden in shadow. A tall man, precise, trained, not here to steal but to probe, testing her reactions. "Elise," Donovan's voice in her earpiece, low and urgent. "He's inside. Are you in position?" She nodded. Adjusting the hallway lighting subtly, she created misdirection. The operative paused, instinctively reading the room. Arthur's silent positioning ensured any retreat would funnel him into their observation zone. Elise stepped into dim light, presence calm yet authoritative. "You're out of place," she said in Mandarin. "Leave now or be observed until you cannot move without us knowing." The operative hesitated, then retreated, disappearing into shadows. "You handled that flawlessly," Donovan praised. "It wasn't just me," she replied. "The perimeter, the cameras, timing, it was all coordinated. We made him see what he wasn't supposed to. And he'll return, Donovan warned. Next time, he won't repeat his mistakes. Outside, the city breathed in quiet oblivion. Inside the Meridian, the invisible game of strategy, danger, and survival had begun. Elise had faced the first move and survived. But the Liang's shadow was long, their reach inexhaustible. The first breach was only the beginning. Dawn broke with heavy fog. Elise moved precisely, observing subtle alterations. Misaligned vents, minute camera adjustments, and shifts in maintenance logs. The Liangs were probing for weaknesses, mapping the Meridian, predicting her responses. Each small discrepancy was deliberate. A test, a measure of control, a chess move in a game of patience and cunning. She knew they were no longer just defending a building. They were defending every secret, every hard-won survival, and every step of her life. And though the threat was relentless, for the first time in years, Elise felt a cautious thrill, the power to turn the tables and confront a past that had long haunted her. The Meridian's corridors were silent, shadows stretched taut, and the first real challenge had arrived. Elise was at the center of the storm, not running, but ready, alert, strategic, and resolute. The game had begun. Donovan appeared as she returned from the inspection. His presence was quiet but commanding. "You found it." Elise nodded, handing him a small notebook where she had recorded the anomalies. "It's deliberate, subtle. They're trying to get inside our routines, see how we react, measure how quickly we notice." Donovan studied the notes, his lips pressing into a thin line. They've adapted from the last encounter. The operative at the stairwell wasn't enough. Now they're refining their strategy, indirect pressure, psychological probing. Elise's gaze met his, tension flaring in her chest. "They're dangerous. They know our moves before we make them." "Then we change the board again," Donovan said, his voice low but firm. "We don't react, we anticipate. Every anomaly, every pattern shift becomes our advantage." For the next several hours, Elise and Donovan coordinated adjustments, creating deliberate inconsistencies to mislead the Liang's observations. They shifted schedules, rerouted staff, and adjusted camera feeds to present a false narrative. Every move was calculated to confuse, misdirect, and ultimately regain control over the Meridian. Yet as evening descended, the quiet tension was shattered. A faint alarm triggered in the east wing, a soft chime that should have been innocuous. Elise immediately recognized the signal as tampered, a deliberate lure to draw attention. Every instinct screamed danger. She and Donovan moved through the Meridian with practiced precision, weaving through the polished halls and shadowed corridors. The source revealed itself, a small access panel, manipulated to look like routine maintenance. Inside, wires had been subtly altered, not catastrophic, but enough that ignoring it could compromise security in the coming days. Elise's hands moved with precision, restoring control, yet the realization that someone had infiltrated the Meridian so deeply set her nerves on edge. "This isn't just observation anymore," Donovan murmured behind her. "They're testing vulnerabilities directly." Elise's mind raced. How had they gained access? Which systems might be compromised next? Could this escalate into physical confrontation? Or worse, a leak of sensitive information to the Liangs? "They're escalating," she said, her voice measured. "If we don't anticipate the next move, mistakes will be forced upon us. Mistakes we can't recover from." Donovan nodded. "Then we act first. Every sabotage becomes a trap." Together, they implemented a meticulous counter-strategy. Elise handled technical adjustments while Donovan coordinated staff and surveillance. Each minor breach became a lesson, a way to anticipate the Liang's moves and reinforce defenses before the operatives could strike again. Hours passed under relentless focus. The Meridian became a battlefield of shadows and strategy, every corner scrutinized, every pattern analyzed, every anomaly catalogued. Exhaustion gnawed at them both, yet they persisted, driven by the certainty that control was the only safeguard. Finally, Elise allowed herself a moment to exhale. "They're skilled," she admitted, respect threading through her words. "Good," Donovan agreed. But we're better. Now they know it. Outside, the fog thickened over the city, hiding its streets in silver haze. Inside, Elise and Donovan had transformed the Meridian into a fortress of anticipation and cunning. The Liang's reach was formidable, their resources vast, but for the first time Elise felt subtle power returning, a chance to reclaim control. Still, the quiet realization lingered. This was only the beginning. The Liangs would strike again, and next time, the game would be far deadlier and deeply personal. The building felt oppressive that night, its ceilings towering, shadows pooling in every corner, corridors stretching unnaturally. Elise moved silently, every step precise, senses taut. She read the signs of danger, the flicker of shadows, the faint shift of air, and every instinct screamed alert. Donovan's voice came softly through her earpiece. East Wing. 2 operatives. Moving fast. Stay calm. Her body was calm, her mind sharp. 2 figures dressed in black moved with purpose, tools in hand, clearly intending to manipulate the Meridian systems. Elise whispered to Donovan. They intend to breach control points. Focus on observation until we signal, he replied, authoritative yet calm. The operatives split, one to the elevators, one to the maintenance wing. Elise acted instinctively, delaying the maintenance operative with subtle movements and faint sounds. A thin metal rod clattered from a supply cart. He froze, scanning. Elise's shadow moved across the wall unseen, redirecting him toward a dead-end corridor she had anticipated. Meanwhile, Donovan's team intercepted the other operative, blocking access to critical points. Relief mingled with adrenaline. For now, they had the upper hand. The delayed operative realized the manipulation and increased his pace, alert and precise. Elise stepped into the dim light, calm and commanding. Stop, she said in Mandarin, each word deliberate, authoritative. You are out of place. Leave now or be contained. His eyes widened at her poise, the mastery in her stance, the certainty in her voice. He adjusted, assessing, calculating, but the cordon Donovan had established trapped him within a controlled path. Elise moved closer, shadow and light intertwining around her. You will not succeed here, she declared. Finally, the operative retreated, carefully avoiding the traps Elise had set. She turned to Donovan, who nodded with approval. You handled that flawlessly, he said. It's not over, she warned. They'll return, smarter and more prepared. He agreed. We adapt, anticipate, and act. Together, a subtle bond had formed between them, built on trust, strategy, and shared danger. Outside, the city slept under thick fog, oblivious to the invisible battle within the Meridian. Elise and Donovan had survived the first true test, revealing the depth of their skill and precision. Yet the operative's retreat was temporary. The Liang's reach was relentless, and the first confrontation was only the opening act. The storm had arrived at the Meridian's doorstep. Morning brought deceptive calm, thick fog softening the city's outlines yet intensifying unease within the Meridian. Elise moved with measured precision, every step carrying weight. The Liangs were escalating beyond intrusion. Now their reach extended into psychological warfare. An encrypted message on Donovan's device, addressed to Elise in flawless Mandarin, read, You cannot protect him. Her pulse quickened. The target was Donovan. Emotional bonds were being probed. The Liangs were attempting to manipulate fear, protectiveness, even anger, hoping mistakes would follow. They're counting on emotions to cloud judgment, Elise said. We need to anticipate emotional triggers as well as physical ones. Over hours, subtle provocations escalated. Files shifted on computers, personal items subtly altered, cryptic notes left in plain sight. Each anomaly was minor, yet deliberate, a test of patience, vigilance, and composure. Elise cataloged every event, mapping probabilities and patterns, tracing manipulations to their source. At one point, she stood before the Meridian's main hall windows, rain streaking the glass. Memories of Beijing flooded back. Silent corridors of power, observation, and manipulation where threats were both subtle and deadly. The Liang's reach was vast, yet now, thousands of miles away, they sought to control not her movements, but her mind. Donovan approached, grounding her. "You're not alone," he said. "Every trick, every manipulation, we face it together." Elise nodded. "Even together, we must remain vigilant. One misstep could cost everything." As dusk fell, a photograph slid under the private study door. A Beijing alleyway, the site of a narrow escape years ago. Fear and memory surged, but Elise steadied herself. "They want me to feel powerless. But fear doesn't control me anymore. It shapes me. Yes, but it will not dictate my actions." Inside the Meridian, they reviewed every system, camera, and potential intrusion point. Each anomaly became a calculated test, a controlled lesson in anticipating the Liang's next move. The psychological strain was palpable, yet Elise maintained focus, determination hardening her resolve. Night descended fully. The Meridian hummed with tension, every shadow a potential threat. Elise moved like a ghost, cataloging every sound, reflection, and motion. Donovan's earpiece crackled. "East Wing. 3 operatives. Armed. Moving fast. You know the protocol." Fear had become a tool sharpening awareness. The first operative appeared, tall, black-clad, deadly precise. 2 followed, one scanning doors, the other controlling escape routes. Elise orchestrated a meticulous defense of the Meridian, turning every corridor, shadow, and subtle movement into an advantage. When the operatives infiltrated, she directed the lead intruder through diversions while Donovan's team secured elevators and stairwells. Every detail, from lighting to sound, became a tool of control. The second operative lunged for a service panel, but Elise intercepted him with precise, authoritative action. Her calm command in Mandarin froze him. Boxed in by both her positioning and Donovan's team, he was forced to retreat. Elise observed quietly, knowing this first breach was only the beginning. Donovan confirmed, "Every move, every calculation, we control the environment now." The third operative attempted to flank through a lesser-monitored corridor, but Elise anticipated his path, redirecting him into a monitored exit for interception. Every step was critical, every decision deliberate. Minutes felt like hours as they managed each threat, maintaining vigilance, precision, and resolve. Finally, the confrontation ended without direct violence. The operatives withdrew, their objectives unmet. Elise exhaled, recognizing that the Liangs would escalate next, and that the true challenge was yet to come. Donovan reassured her, emphasizing their ability to adapt and convert aggression into advantage. The Meridian had survived its first physical breach, yet the storm of tactics, strategy, and psychological pressure was far from over. The following morning, Elise detected subtle anomalies in the Meridian systems. Communications logs revealed discrepancies, and internal access had been exploited without triggering alarms. Donovan identified this as internal compromise. The Liangs had moved from direct intrusion to stealth sabotage. Elise traced patterns, analyzed probabilities, and cross-referenced every alert. "It's methodical," she noted, recognizing the Liang's goal: to test reactions, probe for weaknesses, and learn from their responses. Donovan agreed, and together they converted every breach into intelligence and fortified defenses. The day stretched in tense, focused vigilance. Elise corrected digital compromises, reinforced redundancies, and implemented countermeasures, while Donovan coordinated staff, decoys, and operational oversight. Each anomaly, false readings, subtle manipulations of temperature or lighting, was a psychological probe meant to unsettle, to provoke errors. Elise cataloged each occurrence, transforming potential distractions into lessons. Together, they converted sabotage into strategic advantage, preserving control and composure. By evening, the patterns were clear. The Liangs sought not just to breach defenses but to manipulate reactions and exploit emotional responses. Elise and Donovan anticipated much of this, implementing redundancies and contingency measures. Their work intertwined skill, strategy, and silent emotional support. The Meridian became a living, adaptive system, responding to every challenge with resilience and intelligence. Elise reflected on the personal stakes, understanding that survival alone was insufficient. Control, foresight, and partnership were essential to endure the escalating threat. Nightfall brought renewed escalation. Multiple operatives infiltrated simultaneously, their coordinated assault combining physical intrusion with environmental sabotage and psychological pressure. Lights flickered, alarms chimed, and subtle manipulations tested focus and composure. Elise intercepted operatives with precise movements, guiding them into controlled paths, while Donovan managed simultaneous threats at key infrastructure points. Each minor discrepancy became a critical clue, each shadow a potential danger. Coordination, anticipation, and disciplined action allowed them to neutralize the attacks without direct confrontation. The internal sabotage escalated alongside physical intrusion. Unauthorized access, flickering feeds, and minor system malfunctions were designed to overwhelm and disorient. Elise tracked every anomaly, recalibrating systems and redirecting operatives into containment paths. Donovan prevented disruptions to critical operations, including communications and energy systems. The psychological stakes were high, as the Liangs probed their thresholds with false alarms, manipulated lighting, and digital messages evoking past fears. Elise filtered each manipulation as data, maintaining calm focus. Hours passed with relentless intensity. Elise and Donovan operated as a single, seamless unit. Every threat was met with precision, every sabotage converted into intelligence. Finally, the operatives retreated, thwarted and frustrated. The Meridian remained intact, strengthened by the night's challenges. Elise allowed herself a brief pause, reflecting on the blend of strategy, skill, and psychological resilience that had ensured survival. Donovan affirmed their joint effort, recognizing the mastery they had demonstrated over complex assaults. The Meridian had endured physical, digital, and psychological attacks, but its defenses, and the bond between Elise and Donovan, had proven adaptive and resilient. Yet the threat was far from over. The Liang's final strike coordinated multiple teams, targeting the East Wing, Central Hub, and Rooftop. Elise prepared, analyzing every route, every environmental cue, anticipating the operatives' moves. Midnight marked the onset of the ultimate escalation. Operatives infiltrated with military precision. Internal systems flickered, alarms chimed intermittently, and environmental manipulations challenged focus and composure. Elise intercepted a lead operative, guiding him into containment, while Donovan blocked others targeting communications and security systems. A rooftop breach required immediate response. Together, Elise and Donovan confronted the lead operative. Elise's calm, authoritative presence, combined with Donovan's strategic positioning, neutralized the threat. With the rooftop secured, Elise and Donovan finally exhaled. The Liang's coordinated assault, physical intrusion, sabotage, and psychological warfare had been countered. Exhausted but composed, they surveyed the Meridian. Systems restored, threats neutralized, intelligence gained. Outside, the city remained unaware, while inside, resilience, strategy, and partnership had prevailed. The Meridian had survived the storm, yet Elise understood this was only a temporary victory. The war was ongoing, requiring foresight, adaptability, and unwavering unity. Elise moved through the corridors with heightened awareness, her senses stretched to the limits. Every shadow, every subtle shift, every sound could indicate the next escalation. Donovan reported coordinated targets across the building: East Wing, service corridors, communications hub. The Liang's aim was complete disruption. Elise responded with disciplined focus, intercepting operatives, recalibrating systems, and guiding threats into controlled paths. Each move was deliberate, each decision precise. Their unity and preparation allowed them to survive the most audacious attack yet. By the end of the night, the multi-layered assault had been neutralized. Elise and Donovan had turned sabotage into intelligence, chaos into opportunity, and threat into control. Exhausted yet resolute, they understood that survival alone was insufficient. Mastery over strategy, psychological resilience, and partnership would determine their ability to withstand future attacks. The Meridians stood fortified, adaptive, and alive, a testament to their skill, foresight, and unyielding trust in one another. While the Liang's reach remained formidable, Elise and Donovan had proven that together they could endure, adapt, and prevail. Yet amidst relief, there was recognition. The Meridian had been tested to its absolute limits, and both Elise and Donovan had been pushed to the edge of endurance. Physically, mentally, and emotionally. The trials had forged an unbreakable bond between them, a partnership capable of withstanding both strategy and chaos, manipulation and force. As dawn approached, the fog lifting over the city, the two stood side by side, surveying the Meridian. The building, a fortress of both steel and strategy, had survived, as had its guardians. Elise's eyes met Donovan's, the unspoken understanding between them profound. Survival was not merely about strength or skill. It was about resilience, trust, and the unwavering commitment to stand together in the face of overwhelming odds. And in that quiet moment, with the first light illuminating the horizon, Elise allowed herself a rare, fleeting smile. The storm had passed. The Liang's reach had been contained. And though the future remained uncertain, for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of absolute clarity. They had survived not by chance, but by mastery of themselves, their environment, and each other. The Meridian stood intact. The night of escalation, sabotage, and infiltration was over. And Elise, for the first time, allowed herself to feel the full weight of victory. A victory hard won, precise, and undeniably theirs. The Meridian stood in the early morning light, quiet yet resolute. The storm of the previous nights, the intrusions, sabotage, covert strikes, and psychological warfare had subsided. Elise and Donovan walked through the corridors, now calm but charged with the weight of what they had endured. Every shadow that had once hinted at danger was gone, every system restored, and every lingering threat neutralized. The Liangs, despite their reach and resources, had been systematically dismantled. Intelligence gathered during the multi-layered assaults had allowed Elise and Donovan to anticipate their next moves, preempt their plans, and ultimately expose their network to authorities outside the Meridian. Their influence, meticulously orchestrated for years, unraveled in the face of precision, foresight, and unwavering resolve. Elise paused at the central hall, where polished floors reflected the pale dawn light. She allowed herself a long, slow breath, feeling the tension finally release from her shoulders. For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, she could truly feel the calm after the storm. Donovan joined her, handing over a tablet displaying the final confirmations. Operatives detained, systems fully secured, external threats neutralized. "It's done," he said simply. There was no triumph in his voice, only calm certainty. Elise nodded, acknowledging the weight of the moment. "We survived every escalation, every move, every trap, every psychological test. And we turned every weakness into an advantage. That's more than survival. It's mastery." They moved together to the Meridian's observation deck, overlooking the city waking beneath them. Fog lifted from the streets, sunlight glinting on glass towers, the city unaware of the battles that had raged in its heart. The tranquility of the morning contrasted sharply with the intensity of the previous nights, underscoring the magnitude of what they had overcome. Elise reflected on everything, the meticulous planning of the Liangs, the psychological and physical tests, the relentless escalation. Each moment of fear, each tense confrontation, each careful maneuver had forged an unbreakable bond between her and Donovan. They had learned to anticipate, to trust, to act as one unit against a formidable adversary. Her thoughts lingered on the operatives they had contained, the strategies they had countered, the subtle manipulations they had resisted. Each challenge had revealed not only the cunning of the Liangs, but also the depth of human resilience, adaptability, and courage. Elise allowed herself a small, genuine smile. They had emerged not only victorious but fundamentally transformed, honed by adversity, strengthened by strategy, and united by trust. Donovan stood beside her, silent, observing the city below. "They'll try again someday," he said quietly. "But if they do, they'll find we are always one step ahead. Always prepared. Always together." Elisa's eyes met his, and in that moment, words became unnecessary. Every glance, every shared breath, every understanding between them conveyed the truth. They had faced chaos, danger, and manipulation, and they had prevailed. Not because the Liangs had faltered, but because they had mastered themselves, their environment, and each other. The final report confirmed it. The Liang's network was compromised beyond repair. Their influence scattered, their operations exposed, their power dismantled. It was the ultimate culmination of strategy, resilience, and human ingenuity. As the sun rose fully, flooding the meridian with light, Elise allowed herself one last reflection. The battles had been exhausting, relentless, and sometimes terrifying. Yet they had revealed something vital: control over one's environment, mastery of strategy, and unwavering trust in a partner could overcome even the most calculated adversaries. She turned to Donovan, voice soft but resolute. "We've protected everything, and we've survived everything. And now the meridian, and we are truly safe." Donovan nodded. "Together we endured. Together we prevailed. And together we'll continue whatever comes next." The city below shimmered with life, oblivious to the night's trials. Within the meridian, a sanctuary of steel, strategy, and human resolve, Elise and Donovan stood united, victorious, vigilant, and ready for whatever challenges the future might hold. The storm had passed, the Liangs were defeated, and the calm of victory settled into every corner of the building, every system, and every heartbeat. And in that moment, Elise knew that survival had always been just the beginning. True mastery lay in resilience, strategy, and the unbreakable bond forged through adversity. A bond that no threat, no manipulation, no force could ever sever. The meridian endured. They endured. And together they were unstoppable.